There is an old observation often attributed to Niccolò Machiavelli. The greatest deceptions are not the ones we create for others, but the ones we create for ourselves. Most people spend their lives burying pain. A few spend their lives searching for it. And then there are those rare souls who become consumed by it. The woman in this story belonged to the last group. Every night, at exactly 11:17 p.m., she stepped out of her back door carrying a shovel. The neighborhood eventually learned her routine. The sound always came first. Metal striking earth, slow, rhythmic, relentless. Then the beam of a flashlight would appear in the darkness. Then silence, then another strike. And another, and another. Night after night, week after week, month after month. The same patch of ground, the same woman, the same obsession. Nobody understood it. The neighbors watched from behind their curtains. Some whispered theories. Others avoided looking altogether. Human beings have always feared what they cannot explain. A locked room. An unanswered question. A person carrying a burden too heavy to describe. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "If you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." What nobody knew was that this woman had been staring into an abyss for years. And every shovel of dirt she removed seemed to pull her deeper into it. At first, people assumed it would stop. Most obsessions do. Most strange behaviors eventually fade beneath the weight of ordinary life. This one didn't. The hole continued growing, deeper, wider, more demanding, as though the earth itself was asking something from her, and she was the only person willing to answer. The police received calls. Concerned neighbors filed reports. Relatives tried reaching out. Nothing changed. She returned every night, without fail, as if some invisible appointment had been made, as if missing a single evening carried consequences only she understood. The human mind is a fascinating thing. Dark psychology teaches that when pain remains unresolved, it often seeks expression through ritual. Some people collect memories, some replay conversations, some build walls around themselves, and some begin digging. But there was a detail almost everyone overlooked, a detail that would later make this story impossible to forget. You see, she never searched different areas of the yard, never experimented, never wandered. From the very beginning, she dug in exactly the same location, centimeter by centimeter, layer by layer, like someone following instructions nobody else could hear. The question was no longer whether she was searching for something. The question was, how did she know where to look? And then, after months of digging, something happened that transformed a local mystery into something far more unsettling. One morning just before sunrise, the ground beneath her feet began to move. At first it was subtle, easy to dismiss, a shift, a tremor, a slight disturbance in the soil. Then the earth responded again, this time with enough force to stop her cold, and in that moment, everything changed. Because what was buried beneath that backyard was not the only thing waiting to be uncovered. The deeper truth had been buried inside her all along. But to understand why she kept returning to that patch of earth, why she ignored every warning, and why she seemed willing to sacrifice everything for a hole in the ground, we have to go back. Back to the day her life split into two versions. The woman she used to be, and the woman who started digging. 3 years earlier, Sarah had been someone completely different. Not extraordinary, not famous, not the kind of person people remember long after they leave a room. She was simply happy. And sometimes, those are the people with the furthest distance to fall. Her mornings began with small routines. Coffee brewing in the kitchen, a child's laughter echoing down the hallway. Conversations about things that seemed important at the time, but would later become priceless memories. The future felt certain, predictable, safe, but life has a habit of changing direction without warning. A single afternoon shattered everything. One moment her son was there. The next, he wasn't. There was no dramatic event, no villain, no explanation capable of satisfying a mother's heart. Only questions that arrived immediately and refused to leave. Why him? Why now? Why us? Questions with no answers. And as many philosophers have observed throughout history, the human mind can endure suffering more easily than uncertainty. Pain has shape. Pain has weight. Pain can be carried. But unanswered questions, they remain alive, they grow, they evolve, they follow you into every room. The funeral came and went. Flowers arrived. Condolences were offered. Tears were shared. Then, little by little, everyone returned to their own lives. As people always do. The world does not stop moving simply because one heart has stopped functioning properly. Days passed, weeks passed. Months passed. The phone rang less often. The visits became rare. The sympathy faded into memory. Yet inside Sarah's house, time appeared frozen. The toys remained where they had been left. The photographs stayed untouched. Even the bedroom door remained closed most days. as though opening it would force reality to speak out loud. Nietzsche once observed that there are wounds that transform a person long before they heal. Sarah was becoming someone new, not because she wanted to, because grief was rebuilding her from the inside, and grief is rarely gentle. At first, people assumed she was mourning. Then they began to wonder if something else was happening. The curtains remained closed, day after day. The television stayed off. The lights stayed dim. Neighbors would occasionally catch a glimpse of her standing motionless near a window, watching, waiting. For what? No one knew. Phone calls went unanswered. Messages remained unopened. Even family members struggled to reach her. And whenever someone finally did, something felt different. Not frightening, not aggressive, just distant. As though part of her attention existed somewhere else, somewhere nobody could follow. Months later, a relative visited unexpectedly. What she discovered would become the first detail that truly unsettled everyone. The dining table had been set for 2 people. One plate sat untouched, across from Sarah's seat, carefully arranged, perfectly clean, as though someone was expected to arrive at any moment. When asked about it, Sarah offered a simple explanation. He doesn't like eating alone. The room fell silent. Nobody knew what to say. Perhaps it was denial. Perhaps it was grief. Perhaps it was a mother's desperate attempt to keep a connection alive. But from that day forward, concern began replacing sympathy, because the line between remembering someone and refusing to let them go can become difficult to see, especially when loss has altered the way a person experiences reality. Then strange details started accumulating, small things, easy to dismiss on their own, yet impossible to ignore together. Neighbors occasionally reported hearing footsteps inside the house late at night. Even when Sarah was known to be asleep, a light would appear in her son's bedroom, then disappear. Family photographs sometimes changed position. Objects seemed to move. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be proven, only enough to create uncertainty. And uncertainty has always been fertile ground for fear. Machiavelli once wrote that people fear what they cannot understand more than what they can clearly see. The problem was, nobody understood what was happening to Sarah, including Sarah herself. Then came the journal. A worn notebook hidden inside a kitchen drawer. Its pages were filled with dates, times, observations, short sentences written in hurried handwriting. Most made little sense, until investigators later discovered one entry that appeared again and again, the same sentence, repeated dozens of times across multiple pages, almost like a warning or a reminder. 11:17 p.m. Nothing else, just a time, again, and again, and again, 11:17 p.m. At the time, nobody understood its significance. Not her relatives, not her neighbors, not even Sarah. But that number would eventually become the center of everything, because around that same period, something began happening after midnight. Something that would slowly pull Sarah toward the backyard, toward the patch of ground, toward the obsession that would consume the next chapter of her life. And it all started with a dream. A dream she could never fully remember, yet somehow could never forget. Months later, something changed, or perhaps something finally gave way. There is a parable that appears throughout different cultures. It speaks of a traveler who hears faint knocking beneath the floor of his home. The first night he ignores it. The second night he listens. By the third night he can think of nothing else. The knocking itself is not what destroys him. His need to understand it does. The human mind is often like that. A single unanswered question can become heavier than 1,000 answers. And Sarah was carrying more unanswered questions than anyone around her realized. The journal continued filling with entries. Most were written during the early hours of the morning, when the rest of the world slept, when silence became loud enough to hear your own thoughts, and sometimes your own fears. She slept less, thought more, a dangerous combination. Psychologists have long understood that grief can alter perception, not because a person becomes irrational, but because loss forces the mind to search relentlessly for what has been taken away. Every memory becomes evidence. Every coincidence becomes meaningful. Every dream feels important. And Sarah had begun dreaming every single night, always the same dream. Always the same place. Always the same voice. At first, the details were vague. A darkness she couldn't describe. A coldness she could somehow feel. The distant outline of a child. Then came the voice. Soft, almost drowned out by the silence around it, yet unmistakable, her son's voice. Calling her name, not screaming, not crying, simply calling, as though he was trying to guide her somewhere. The dream ended before she could reach him, every time. The same ending, the same frustration, the same emptiness waiting when she opened her eyes. At first she ignored it. Dreams are dreams. Grief creates strange experiences. Everyone told her the same thing. It would pass. It didn't. The dreams returned the following night, then the night after that, then the next, each one becoming clearer than the last. The darkness began taking shape. The voice became easier to hear. The surroundings became familiar. And then Sarah noticed something that disturbed her. In every dream, her son appeared to be standing below her, not far away, not hidden, below, as though he existed somewhere beneath the surface of the world she knew. When she woke each morning, she found herself staring at the floor, studying patches of dirt outside her windows, examining the ground around her property without understanding why. A thought had taken root, and like all dangerous thoughts, it arrived quietly. What if the dream meant something? The question itself frightened her, because once a question enters the mind, it rarely leaves unchanged. Nietzsche warned that human beings do not suffer because of reality alone. They suffer because of the meanings they attach to it. And Sarah was beginning to attach meaning to everything. The dreams, the journal, the repeated appearance of 11:17 p.m., even the old drawing she discovered tucked between forgotten papers. A drawing made by her son years earlier. Most people would have overlooked it. A child's sketch, simple lines, simple shapes, yet Sarah couldn't stop staring at it. Because in the corner of the drawing, behind a small house, was a dark circle in the ground, a hole. The moment she noticed it, a chill moved through her, not fear, recognition, as though she had seen it before, somewhere, somehow. The drawing stayed on her kitchen table for days, then weeks. Every morning she examined it, every night she dreamed again. And every night her son seemed closer, the voice clearer, the darkness deeper. Soon sleep became something she dreaded. People imagine exhaustion as weakness. The truth is more complicated. After enough sleepless nights, the world begins changing shape. Hours blur together. Thoughts lose their boundaries. Memories feel immediate. Dreams feel real. Reality begins negotiating with imagination. Sarah stopped trusting her own perceptions. Some mornings, she couldn't remember whether conversations had happened in dreams or in waking life. Sometimes she heard her son's laughter in empty rooms. Sometimes she caught herself answering questions nobody had asked. And yet, through all of it, one detail remained consistent. 11:17 p.m. Every dream began at 11:17 p.m. Every journal entry referenced 11:17 p.m. Every sleepless night seemed to revolve around that exact moment, as though her entire life had become synchronized to a clock only she could hear. Then came the night everything changed. The house was silent, the neighborhood asleep. Rain clouds drifted slowly across the sky. Sarah sat alone at her kitchen table. The drawing lay in front of her, the journal beside it, the clock on the wall ticking louder than usual. 10:58 p.m., 11:03 p.m., 11:14 p.m. Then 11:17 p.m. The power flickered, once, twice, then darkness. The room fell completely silent. No television, no refrigerator hum, no distant traffic, nothing, only silence. And somewhere within that silence, a thought entered her mind with unusual clarity. Not a voice, not a command, just a certainty so powerful it felt impossible to ignore. Her eyes drifted toward the backyard, toward the darkness beyond the window, toward a patch of ground she had never paid attention to before. For several moments she sat motionless. Then she stood, walked to the garage, reached for a shovel, and without fully understanding why, opened the back door. What happened next would become the beginning of an obsession that would consume months of her life. Because the first hole is never the dangerous one. The dangerous moment is when you decide to dig a second time. The first night lasted less than 20 minutes. Just enough time to break the surface. Just enough time to convince herself she was making a mistake. When she returned inside, her hands trembled. Her clothes were stained with dirt. And yet, for the first time in months, the dream did not come. She slept through the entire night. No voice, no darkness, no child standing somewhere beyond her reach. Nothing, only silence. And after months of torment, that silence felt like relief. The next evening she found herself thinking about the whole. Not constantly, just enough. Like a melody that refuses to leave your head. A question without an answer, an itch beneath the skin. Then 11:17 p.m. arrived, and she walked outside again. One night became 2, 2 became 10, 10 became 60. The hole grew larger, so did the questions. Every day she promised herself it would be the last time. Every night she returned. The routine became almost sacred. The clock approached 11:17. She grabbed the shovel. She stepped into the darkness. She dug. The world disappeared. Hours passed unnoticed, and somehow, the dreams stayed away. That was the part nobody else understood. The digging wasn't frightening to Sarah. Stopping was. Because every time she missed a night, the dreams returned, stronger, closer, more vivid than before, as though something was waiting for her attention, demanding it. The human mind often creates bargains with suffering, unspoken agreements, false solutions. If I do this, the pain will stay away. If I keep moving, I won't have to feel. If I keep digging, I won't have to remember. Sarah never admitted it aloud, but the hole had become more than a hole. It had become medicine, a strange medicine, an exhausting medicine, a medicine that was slowly consuming her life. Weeks turned into months. The seasons shifted, rain soaked the ground, cold winds cut through the darkness. Still she dug. The skin on her hands hardened. Her fingernails remained packed with dirt. Sleep became shorter, meals became irregular, conversations became rare. Nothing mattered except the next night, and the night after that, and the one after that. Neighbors watched from their windows. At first they laughed. Then they worried. Then they became afraid. People whispered they always do. One neighbor claimed she was hiding evidence. Another believed she had discovered buried money. Others suspected she was searching for something left behind by a previous owner. The theories multiplied faster than the hole itself, each one more dramatic than the last. But none of them explained the most unsettling detail. She never looked excited. She never looked hopeful. She never behaved like someone expecting treasure. She looked driven, like a prisoner carrying out a sentence, like someone fulfilling an obligation only she understood. Machiavelli once observed that people reveal their true nature when desire becomes stronger than reason. If that was true, then what desire was driving Sarah? What need could possibly justify months of digging through rain, exhaustion, and isolation? The answer was far more human than anyone imagined. She wasn't searching for something beneath the earth. She was searching for something buried inside herself. Because grief has a strange way of transforming pain into ritual. Sometimes people revisit old photographs. Sometimes they replay old messages. Sometimes they tell the same stories over and over again. And sometimes they create a task so demanding that it leaves no room for sorrow. Every strike of the shovel became a distraction. Every pile of dirt became another day survived. Every exhausted night postponed a conversation she was terrified to have. The conversation with herself, the truth she had spent years avoiding, that her son was gone, and no amount of searching could change it. But grief is clever. It rarely presents itself honestly. It disguises itself as hope, as purpose, as determination, and before long, Sarah could no longer separate the digging from the possibility that there was still something left to find. Then the dreams changed. Not immediately, not dramatically, just enough to disturb her. The child no longer appeared far away. He appeared closer, close enough to see details, close enough to recognize expressions, close enough to feel real. And each night, the same thing happened. He pointed downward, toward the darkness beneath him, toward something she could not see. Then the dream would end, leaving her with more questions than answers. One evening, she opened the journal and noticed something she had somehow missed. Scattered across dozens of pages were sketches she didn't remember drawing, crude outlines, lines and circles, shapes connected by arrows. And in the center of nearly every page, the same symbol appeared again and again, a circle. Beneath a house, the exact location where she had been digging. She stared at the pages for hours, trying to remember when she drew them, trying to understand why. She couldn't. That frightened her more than the dreams. Because dreams happen while you're asleep. The journal had been written while she was awake, or at least, she thought she was. The following night, she dug harder than ever before. The shovel struck roots, rocks, layers of compact earth. Yet she refused to stop. Midnight passed, then 1 o'clock, then 2. The hole had become deep enough that she disappeared from view when standing inside it. And that was when she noticed something unusual. The soil had changed. The texture felt different. The color looked different. Even the smell seemed different. For several seconds, she simply stared, listening, waiting. A strange feeling settled over her. The feeling that she was close to something. Not close to understanding. Close to discovery. There is a dangerous moment in every obsession. The moment when effort begins producing results. Because results create belief. And belief can carry a person far beyond the limits of reason. The next morning, exhausted and covered in dirt, Sarah returned to inspect the hole. What she found waiting for her would become the first event nobody could explain. The disturbed soil she had uncovered during the night was no longer where she left it. The earth appeared rearranged, shifted, altered, as though someone had entered the hole after she left, and done something in the darkness, something impossible to understand. At first, she blamed exhaustion. Then she blamed memory. But over the following days, the same thing happened again, and again and again, until eventually even Sarah could no longer dismiss it. Because the ground wasn't simply changing, it was responding. And what happened next would force her to confront a possibility she had never considered before. There is an old saying often attributed to those who study the human condition. The deeper a person searches outside themselves, the more likely they are to discover what was waiting inside all along. Sarah would soon learn how true that was. But first, the ground had to move. The weeks leading up to that night felt different. The dreams had become almost unbearable. The journal entries grew shorter, more frantic, more desperate, entire pages filled with only a few words. Closer, almost there, don't stop. Sometimes the handwriting looked like her own. Sometimes it looked unfamiliar, as though different versions of the same person had been sharing the notebook. The neighbors noticed changes too. She looked thinner, more exhausted. The determination that once fueled her now seemed mixed with something else, anticipation, as though she could sense an ending approaching. The hole was now large enough to command attention. What began as a small disturbance in the backyard had become a scar across the property, a wound in the earth, a monument to obsession. And on the night everything changed, the sky seemed to share her unrest. Dark clouds gathered long before sunset. The wind arrived first, then the rain, then the distant growl of thunder rolling across the horizon. Most people stayed indoors. Sarah didn't. At exactly 11:17 p.m., she stepped into the storm, shovel in hand, flashlight trembling against the darkness. Rainwater streamed down her jacket. Mud clung to her boots. The wind fought every movement. Yet she climbed into the hole once again. Because obsession has a strange relationship with discomfort. Once a person becomes consumed by a purpose, pain begins to feel irrelevant. The first hour passed without incident. Rain hammered the earth. Thunder echoed overhead. The flashlight beam danced across the walls of the excavation. Then something happened. Something small, almost easy to miss. A vibration. A faint tremor beneath her feet. Sarah stopped digging. The shovel hung motionless in her hands. She listened. The rain continued. The wind continued. For several seconds, nothing else happened. Then it came again, a shift, subtle, yet unmistakable. The ground had moved. A cold sensation traveled through her body. Not fear, recognition. The kind of feeling people experience when reality suddenly aligns with something they have sensed for a long time. The flashlight beam shook as she aimed it toward the bottom of the hole. The soil appeared different, loose, unstable, almost breathing. Thunder cracked overhead. The earth responded, this time with enough force to send small rocks tumbling downward. Sarah stumbled backward, her heart pounded. The rain intensified. The wind screamed through the trees, and then the ground gave way. The collapse began slowly. A section of soil crumbled inward, then another, then another. Years of compact earth surrendered all at once. The sound was deafening. Mud, roots, stones, everything rushed downward into darkness. Sarah scrambled towards safety as the earth continued opening beneath her. For a moment, she could only watch, frozen, breathing hard, rain striking her face, the flashlight trembling in her hands. Because where solid ground had existed moments earlier, there was now an opening, a void, a passage into something hidden. For months she had imagined this moment, dreamed about it, obsessed over it, and now it was finally here. Most people would have run. Most people would have called for help. Sarah climbed closer. The flashlight beam disappeared into the opening. At first she saw nothing, only darkness. Then shapes slowly emerged, wood, concrete, metal, not natural formations, not buried treasure. Not anything supernatural. Something built, something forgotten, a structure, hidden beneath the property, protected by decades of earth. The storm raged above as Sarah stared into the opening. A realization settled over her. Whatever she had uncovered, someone had intended it to remain hidden. The next morning, authorities arrived. Engineers inspected the site. Local records were examined. Property archives were searched, and eventually the answer emerged. The chamber was an old storm shelter, built generations earlier. Long before Sarah ever owned the property, long before the neighborhood existed in its current form, a forgotten survival shelter. Abandoned and buried by time. No secret tunnels, no treasure, no conspiracy, no hidden evidence, no miraculous answers, just a room. A forgotten room beneath the earth. The discovery disappointed everyone. The neighbors, the reporters, the curious strangers who had followed the story. People expected revelation. They expected mystery. They expected something extraordinary. Instead, they found dust, decay, darkness, silence. Yet the greatest discoveries are rarely the ones people expect. Because as Sarah stood inside that chamber for the first time, shining her flashlight across the empty walls, she experienced something she had not felt in years: disappointment. And strangely, that disappointment mattered. Because for months, she had convinced herself there was something waiting at the bottom of the hole. A message, an answer, a connection. a reason. Now there was nothing, nothing except the truth. And the truth can be far more frightening than any mystery. The room was empty. Her son wasn't there. No explanation was there. No hidden meaning was there, only silence. The same silence she had spent years trying to escape. The same silence she had buried beneath rituals, dreams, obsessions, and endless nights of digging. For the first time since her loss, there was nowhere left to search, nowhere left to dig, nowhere left to run. Only herself remained. And what happened after that discovery would become the most important part of her journey. Because the chamber beneath the earth was never the thing she was truly searching for. It was merely the final place her grief had led her before she was forced to confront it. There is a truth few people speak about openly. Human beings can survive extraordinary amounts of pain. What often destroys them is avoidance. The constant effort to stay one step ahead of their own emotions, to outrun memories, to outrun grief, to outrun themselves. For months, Sarah had been running. She simply happened to be running in circles around a hole. Now there was nowhere left to go. The storm shelter had been opened. The mystery had been solved. The earth had surrendered its secret. And the secret was nothing. Nothing waiting for her, nothing hidden, nothing miraculous. No final message, no explanation, no reunion. Only an empty room. A forgotten shelter beneath forgotten soil. For the first time in months, Sarah sat down. No shovel, no flashlight, no journal. No desperate need to continue. She simply sat at the edge of the excavation and stared into the silence below. The sunrise arrived slowly. A faint light creeping across the horizon. The same sunrise she had ignored hundreds of times before. But this morning felt different, because something else was finally beginning to rise. Awareness. There is a moment in every person's life when illusion can no longer support the weight placed upon it. A moment when reality arrives and asks to be acknowledged. This was Sarah's moment. As she looked into the empty chamber, a question surfaced, not about her son, not about the dreams, not about the hole. A question about herself. Why had she continued digging after the first night? The answer arrived quietly, not as a revelation, not as a dramatic realization, as truth, simple, uncomfortable, unavoidable. The hole had never been about finding her son. It had been about avoiding her grief. The realization struck harder than any collapse of earth, because suddenly everything made sense. The dreams, the obsession, the rituals, the endless nights. Every shovel of dirt removed from the ground had been an attempt to remove pain from her heart. Every hour spent digging had been an hour spent avoiding acceptance. Every exhausted night had protected her from a reality she wasn't ready to face. Machiavelli once observed that people often deceive themselves before anyone else has the chance to. Sarah understood that now. She had convinced herself she was searching. But searching and avoiding can sometimes look identical from the outside. The difference exists only within. For years, she had believed she was moving forward. Yet emotionally, she had remained standing in the same place. The day she lost her son. The human mind is remarkably creative when protecting itself. It builds routines, distractions, obsessions, entire worlds if necessary, anything to delay confrontation with pain. Because pain asks for something difficult, presence. And presence is often harder than suffering. To feel loss fully, to acknowledge it completely, to stop negotiating with reality. That requires courage. Far more courage than digging through earth. Far more courage than chasing answers. Far more courage than hope itself. As the morning continued, Sarah remained seated. Hours passed, she barely noticed. For the first time in years, there was no task demanding her attention. No mystery requiring resolution. No ritual waiting for nightfall. Only silence. And within that silence, grief finally found room to speak. The tears arrived without warning, at first a few, then more. Then years of restrained sorrow breaking free all at once. She cried for the birthdays she would never celebrate with him. She cried for the conversations they would never have. She cried for every future memory that had disappeared before it had a chance to exist. Most of all, she cried for herself, for the exhausted woman who had spent years carrying a burden she never learned how to put down. The backyard remained empty. The wind moved gently through the trees. The hole sat quietly behind her. No longer a destination, no longer a mission. Just a hole. And yet that morning, something extraordinary happened. Not in the ground, inside Sarah. Because grief finally stopped being her enemy. It became her companion. A painful companion, a permanent companion. But no longer something she needed to escape. Nietzsche once suggested that suffering changes meaning when we stop asking why it happened and start asking how we will carry it. Sarah wasn't there yet. Not completely. Healing rarely arrives in a single moment, but she had taken the first step. And the first step is often the hardest. That evening, for the first time in months, 11:17 p.m. came and went. The shovel remained untouched. The backyard remained empty. Sarah remained inside. The dreams returned that night. But something about them had changed. The darkness felt different. The fear felt different. And for the first time, her son wasn't calling for her to follow him. He was simply standing there, watching, smiling, before slowly fading away. When she woke the next morning, she discovered something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not complete peace. Not permanent peace. Just enough to remind her that healing was possible. And strangely, the moment she finally stopped running became the moment her life began moving forward again. Because what happened next would transform the hole in her backyard into something nobody could have imagined. Not a monument to grief, but a symbol of what can happen when a person survives it. There is an ancient parable about two men carrying the same stone. One man viewed it as a punishment. The other viewed it as a foundation. The stone never changed, only the meaning attached to it. And perhaps that is one of life's deepest lessons. We rarely control what happens to us, but eventually, we must decide what it becomes. Months passed. The seasons shifted once again. The storms disappeared. The long nights became shorter. And the hole remained exactly where it had always been, a reminder of everything Sarah had endured. Visitors expected her to fill it, to erase it, to cover it with fresh soil and move on. That is what most people do with painful chapters. Hide them, bury them, pretend they never happened. But Sarah had spent years trying to bury pain. She understood now that hidden wounds rarely heal. They simply wait. So instead of removing the hole, she transformed it. The project began quietly, one wheelbarrow at a time, one flower at a time, one day at a time. The same persistence that had once fueled obsession now fueled recovery. Where there had once been mud, there was soil prepared for growth. Where there had once been darkness, there was sunlight. Where there had once been silence, there were voices. Life has a remarkable ability to return when given space. Soon flowers appeared, then pathways, then benches, then people. Families who understood loss, parents carrying grief of their own, individuals struggling with memories they could not share elsewhere, people who felt isolated by pain, people who believed nobody understood, people very much like Sarah. What began as a hole in the ground slowly became something unexpected. A gathering place, a place where suffering no longer needed to hide, a place where stories could be spoken aloud, a place where tears were not viewed as weakness, a place where healing could begin. Children eventually played among the flowers. Their laughter drifted through the garden on warm afternoons. At first, Sarah found it difficult to hear. The sound reminded her of everything she had lost, but over time, it reminded her of something else. Everything she still had. The ability to love, the ability to connect, the ability to continue. The wound remained. It always would. Some losses never disappear. Some absences become permanent residents within the human heart. Modern culture often speaks about healing as though it means forgetting, as though recovery means returning to who you were before the pain arrived. But that is rarely how transformation works. The person who enters suffering is not the same person who emerges from it, and perhaps they are not supposed to be. Sarah never stopped missing her son. She never stopped thinking about him. Certain dates still hurt. Certain memories still brought tears. Certain quiet evenings still felt heavy. But something fundamental had changed. The grief no longer controlled the direction of her life. She carried it, instead of being carried by it. That distinction changed everything. Nietzsche once wrote that a person who has a reason to live can endure almost any hardship. For years, Sarah had been surviving. Now she had rediscovered a reason. Not because the pain disappeared, because she found purpose within it. The woman who once spent every night digging alone in darkness now spent her days helping others find light. The woman who once withdrew from the world slowly returned to it. The woman who once searched endlessly for answers began offering comfort instead, and in that transformation, a new identity emerged, not instantly, not perfectly, but undeniably. Broken became healing, lost became purposeful, isolated became connected, fear became acceptance. The whole remained exactly where it had always been, yet its meaning had changed completely, because it no longer represented what she had lost. It represented what she had survived, and survival, when embraced with courage, often becomes the foundation of something far greater than happiness. It becomes wisdom. It becomes strength. It becomes a gift that can be shared. The neighbors who once watched her through their curtains now watched something very different. Not a woman disappearing into grief, but a woman returning from it. And the most remarkable part was this. The ground had stopped moving long ago. Yet Sarah's life had never moved more than it was moving now. Because true transformation does not begin when circumstances change. It begins when meaning changes, and Sarah was finally learning how to live again. To maximize emotional closure, comments, rewatches, and audience reflection, the ending should feel larger than Sarah's story. It should feel like it is speaking directly to the viewer. As the sun disappeared behind the horizon, the garden grew quiet. The children went home, the conversations faded. The wind moved gently through the flowers, and near the entrance, leaning against a wooden fence, rested an old shovel, unused, weathered, still. Months earlier, that shovel had been a tool of obsession, a companion to sleepless nights, a witness to grief, a symbol of a woman searching desperately for something she could not name. Now it was simply a reminder of how far she had traveled without ever leaving home. In the end, the ground wasn't the only thing that moved, so did she. The earth collapsed. The shelter was exposed. The mystery was solved. But the greatest discovery was never hidden beneath the property. It was hidden beneath years of sorrow, hidden beneath denial, hidden beneath fear, hidden beneath the desperate hope that one more answer might somehow undo an unbearable loss. There is a lesson buried inside almost every human life. Most people spend years looking for it in the wrong places. Some search through success, others search through relationships. Some search through distractions, and some, like Sarah, search through the darkness itself. But life has a strange way of teaching the same truth again and again. Healing rarely arrives when we find what we are looking for. It arrives when we stop running from what we already know. Because grief is not a problem to solve, pain is not an enemy to defeat, and loss is not a puzzle waiting for an answer. They are experiences asking to be carried. As Carl Jung once observed, what you resist persists, and what you finally face begins to lose its power over you. Sarah spent years digging through the earth, yet the deepest excavation happened within her. Every layer of soil removed from the ground mirrored a layer of pain she had refused to confront. Every night she searched outside herself, until life finally guided her inward. Perhaps that is why stories like hers stay with us. Because most of us have our own hole, a memory we revisit, a regret we replay, a wound we keep circling, a chapter we refuse to close, something we continue digging toward long after it has stopped serving us. The details may be different, but the struggle is the same. To let go, to accept, to continue live. And maybe true courage has never been about holding on. Maybe true courage is knowing when to release what can no longer be changed, to stop negotiating with yesterday, to stop searching for answers that do not exist, to stop asking life to return what it has already taken, and instead, to honor the loss by continuing forward. When people visit the garden today, many never learn the full story. They see flowers, benches, sunlight, children laughing in the distance. What they don't see is the woman who once stood alone in the rain at 11:17 every night. The woman who believed salvation waited at the bottom of a hole. The woman who nearly disappeared inside her own grief. Because she is gone now. Not because she died. Because she transformed. And perhaps that is the quiet miracle hidden within every human struggle. The person who enters suffering is not the person who leaves it. If they keep going, they become someone new, someone wiser, someone stronger, someone capable of helping others find their way through the dark. The wind continued moving through the flowers. The garden remained still. And somewhere within that silence, there was finally peace. Not the peace of forgetting, not the peace of having all the answers, but the peace that comes when a person finally stops fighting reality. Because the deepest things buried in life are rarely beneath our feet. They are within us, waiting patiently, waiting quietly, waiting for the day we find the courage to face them, and sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is stop digging. Since your channel is through silent storms, the ending CTA can feel much more personal and branded. Before you leave, take a moment and ask yourself a simple question. What are you still digging for? Perhaps it is a memory. Perhaps it is a mistake. Perhaps it is a version of yourself that disappeared after life changed without permission. Whatever it is, I hope Sarah's story reminds you that healing is not found in running from our wounds. It is found in facing them. And if this story connected with something you've been carrying in silence, share your thoughts in the comments below. You may be surprised how many people understand exactly what you're feeling. And if you know someone who is struggling through their own silent battle, share this story with them. Sometimes a single story arrives at exactly the right moment in someone's life. If you enjoy deeply emotional documentaries about resilience, transformation, human psychology, loss, healing, and the strength hidden within ordinary people, subscribe to Through Silent Storms and become part of our growing community. Here, We explore the journeys people rarely talk about, the battles fought behind closed doors, the moments that break us, and the moments that rebuild us. Because every storm leaves a mark. But every storm also leaves a lesson. Thank you for spending these moments with us. This is Through Silent Storms. And remember, sometimes the deepest wounds become the source of our greatest strength. Until next time, keep moving forward.